Variances can be found under Anomalies within the Review tab. Variances has two sections, Variances and Sequence. Let's unpack each in more detail. In Variances, you can identify account movements and variances that deviate from expected business activity. For instance, if we look at the expenses account and then repairs and maintenance, we can see that the transaction of 2,800 is flagged as a variance due to this not being the expected expense amount of 1,500. Sequence identifies gaps in transaction volume. Sequence is useful for determining if transaction activity is below a certain expected threshold, or to ensure that your bank account remains connected to your accounting software, especially for cloud accounting software. We can add a threshold amount and choose to display this threshold by toggling on the Show Threshold button. We can also change the period that you want to analyze by selecting the month and the year. By using the Variances feature within Syft, we can see which accounts are not acting as expected and therefore use this as a good control measure.
The Multi-Assign tab under Anomalies within Syft's Audit tool gives you insight into anomalies in the way that you're transacting with your contacts. It has a Multiple Accounts tab, multiple tax codes, and a non-default accounts or tax codes. And what these tabs do is they identify when you are transacting in unusual ways with your contacts. So let's go and explore this a little bit more to clarify what I mean. The first two tabs, multiple accounts and multiple tax codes, identify when you're transacting through multiple accounts or with various different tax codes for one contact. So for example, with Miles Axelrod, we're currently transacting with direct freight and repairs and maintenance. You'll see that with other contacts, we have various different accounts that we're transacting with. And the reason this is worth considering is we'd usually only expect to transact with a contact in a limited number of ways. What do I mean by that? Well, with Miles Axelrod, perhaps they are the supplier of all of our direct freight, and so we'd expect to be having these direct freight transactions. But we might not also get repairs and maintenance from them, and so this repairs and maintenance might be an unusual transaction. A few things to look out for when you're considering what is usual or unusual is firstly your understanding of your relationship with that contact. What do you normally do with that contact? And secondly, the number of transactions you have for each type of account. So again here, direct freight happens 11 times within this period, whereas repairs and maintenance is only twice. And so it would seem that repairs and maintenance is unusual. So that's how we would consider this multiple accounts view and go and identify any unusual accounts. Where we have unusual accounts, we could click on the number of transactions and we'd be taken to the underlying transactions that relate to that contact in those accounts, and we could then investigate if this was a valid transaction or not. If we're happy with this transaction, we could click dismiss, or we could go and investigate it further. We can dismiss at a transaction level or at account level or at an overall contact level. And we'll explore the multi-level dismissal and the purpose of that a bit later on. And now that we've explored the multiple accounts tab, let's look at the multiple tax codes. So in multiple tax codes, Syft identifies where you have transactions with this contact with various different multiple tax codes. So if you're buying or selling from a contact, you would expect that those transactions have similar tax codes. So for example, if you're selling to Alice, you'd expect that either all transactions are at the standard rate, or perhaps they have no VAT if you're, say, exporting, depending on the rules within your region. But you wouldn't expect to have several different tax codes. So what you could do here is you could go and dismiss the tax code that you think is normal. So perhaps the standard rate is normal. You could go dismiss that tax code, and then Syft won't identify any transactions with the standard rate tax code going forward because that is normal. But it will go and continue to identify no VAT tax codes and old 14% standard rate tax codes. And you can then go and investigate what these relate to and whether they are correct. Perhaps it was an exception or something that happened that was unusual, or if it's something incorrect that you need to go and fix. So that's multiple accounts and multiple tax codes. The purpose is to understand how you're transacting with your contacts and to identify any potential issues where you're transacting over multiple accounts that you perhaps wouldn't expect to, or over multiple tax codes. The next two sections, non-default accounts and non-default tax codes, are only available where you can set default accounts and tax codes in your underlying accounting software. Where that is the case, you'll see that Syft identifies any transactions in accounts that aren't the default. So for Anna Frozen, the default is sales, but you'll note that we also have cake inventory, cake sales, and Tinkerbell cakes. Now, some of this might be expected. Where you have sales, you probably would have a decrease in inventory, and so you can go and dismiss that account. You'll see we already had. We could go look at Ariel, and here you'll see there's various different accounts that are not the default account of sales, but again, some of them might be expected, for example, cost of sales and inventory, but we might not expect a no account with Ariel. That seems unusual, and then we could go and investigate that. So where you've set a default account, that is the way you expect to transact with this contact, and so any other transaction should be investigated. Again, you can dismiss it if it's normal, but if it's not, you should investigate and correct it. Finally, non-default tax code. Again, it needs to be set in your underlying accounting software, but where the default tax code is different to the tax code in a transaction, Syft will identify it, and you're able to then go and dismiss it at the various different levels. The multi-level dismissal within this multi-assign tool is one of my favorite features within Syft. And this dismissal ability makes it possible for you to refine and teach Syft what to consider as an anomaly. So let's see what I mean. We've already touched on the various different ways you can dismiss. So you can dismiss at a transaction level when you drill down into the transaction. You can also dismiss at an account level when you open up the list of accounts. And you can also dismiss at a contact level. So why would you want to use each of these dismissals? So firstly, the contact level. You would want to dismiss at a contact level when you're not concerned about that contact at all. So if you dismiss Cinderella, you're telling Syft that you expect to see lots of different accounts within Cinderella, and Syft will no longer identify any anomalies within that contact. I suggest that you use this only in exceptional circumstances, as if unusual transactions happen in that contact in future, Syft will not identify them for you. The next option is at an account level. So here we could dismiss, just say, Zoo Chocolates. And this is very powerful because if you expect to transact with that contact in more than one account going forward, you can dismiss those accounts. And so going forward, Syft won't identify these as anomalies. For example, with Elsa Frozen, we might expect to make sales, so we could dismiss that account. And along with those sales, we might expect to have frozen cupcakes, so we could dismiss that account. And perhaps we would also expect cost of sales. So we could dismiss those accounts, and going forward, Syft won't identify those as multiple accounts, but it will still note, say, cake inventory and the other types of sales and inventory that we don't expect to sell to this contact. This way, you can refine the anomalies shown, as once you've dismissed this transaction in these accounts, they will not show you the anomalies going forward. The next option is a transaction level dismissal. And this allows you to dismiss a once-off transaction, but keep Syft looking out for future unusual items in this account. For example, if you don't usually do repairs and maintenance with Sir Miles' Axelrod, but this month you know that you did, you can then go and click on the number of transactions and dismiss these two items because you are happy with these specific transactions, but you still want Syft to identify any transactions in repairs and maintenance going forward. We've now dismissed these two specific transactions, but if we go back to the overall level, this repairs and maintenance account will still appear because we have not dismissed the whole account. I hope that you understand the different levels of dismissal that you have within this multi-assign tool, and that you see the power in dismissing once-off transactions or accounts in order to help Syft learn what you expect and identify any anomalies.